This is a no.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
And then y'all just give me the signal when they're ready.
Okay, good. All right, we'll wait for the hand wave from on high here. Okay, it's time to get started. Welcome to Talkback to all of you here in person and those of you joining us online. We're glad that you're here. And most of you know that Talkback is a longtime tradition of our church where we, the congregation, get to ask questions of our daily proclaimer. I'm hosting today. I'm Bob Thomason. I'm a lifelong member of the church and a life deacon here, which just basically means that I'm old. But this is such an honor to do this. Our daily proclaimer is Reverend Dr. Bill Leonard, and Carrie gave a wonderful introduction, but just to recap, Bill is was the founder of the Wake Forest School of Divinity many years ago, and I guess now you're sort of an emeritus there. And he is the author of numerous books and articles, probably too many to count. But most of all, as Carrie pointed out, Bill is a friend of Myers Park Baptist, and maybe our very best friend. You know, as a Baptist church, we don't have a mothership that we're tied to and somebody we can call to come help us in times of crisis. And Bill, as you know, things can get kind of shaky down here in Charlotte sometimes at 1900 Queens Road. And you've always been there to come and talk to us and reassure us that everything is going to be all right. So we're so grateful to have you here once again with us. And thank you for everything you've done for us over these many decades.
Thank you, Bob. We'll jump into this. I'm just going to remind you, some folks reminded me, you know, our daughter Stephanie, who's a person with special needs, has come with me some when I've been here in the summer. And she's the one who says to me, she didn't say it this morning, but she often says, now, are you going to stay for back talk? So that's another way to look at this. So let's jump in.
Great. Okay, I've got a number of questions here, and I gathered them up off the floor, so I'm new at this, folks. I've always watched the host up here kind of juggle cards and the mic, and I said, how did they do that? I think it takes some practice, so I'm learning anyway. Okay, good. All right, so just right off the bat, they're all shuffled now, so one question is, a recent article said all churches are losing members except for large non-denominational churches. Why are the mega churches gaining members?
That's not a question, it's a course, a 3-credit course, but it's a wonderful question and it's a very important one. I'll start by saying Ryan Burge, who's a person I recommend to you, a young man I think he's at Illinois State University, sociologist, who's been documenting all of this for some time and is a kind of hero to many of us. He, about 2 weeks ago, issued a new study and he said that the unnamed denomination in my sermon, of course, is the SBC. And he now says that it is declining at a faster rate than any denomination in American history. It's still large, but they're losing members at breakneck speed. And they've been a case study for me about these issues for a long time. Yes, the mega churches are growing, and they're very hard to study because they don't have a denominational framework, so you can't really track statistics with them. Also, they don't necessarily have members. They may have, and this is my word, I think maybe it's theirs, they have adherents or attenders that and they also often have big front doors and big back doors. People come through them and shop around a lot. But one thing that why this is happening is denominationalism is declining in and of itself across the board. The exception right now is the very conservative Presbyterian Church in America and the Assemblies of God. But even the Assemblies in the last 2 years or so has seen their rise, the rate of their increase drop considerably. So the mega churches, and I can't remember the stat, but maybe something like a third of the people who attend church in this country go to mega churches. And years ago, when I first started writing about this, I called that the Walmarticization of American churches, because what mega churches do is they provide in one congregation many of the services that the old denominations used to: publishing, mission emphasis, ordination, often and growing theological education or pieces of it, and identity. So in a sense, they are singular or multi-campus, many denominations. And I think that's one reason people are going to them. Also, they have been able to draw a younger constituency and families. And one of the things that's happening across the board, and even the Southern Baptists and some other evangelical, quote unquote, denominations are declining and have an aging rapidly with an inability to reach younger generations. In around 2020, 2021, an article in Christianity Today suggested that they had done a study, and in that particular study, half of the young people who were brought up in the Southern Baptist Convention had left the denomination. And so, again, that's why the SBC is a case study, because when we were all in there and then they wanted us out, they promised that if they went with biblical inerrancy and got rid of people like us, that they would keep growing and wouldn't go the way of the, quote, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Disciples of Christ, etc. It's not true. It's not worked. And it's really crashing in on them. So, yes, the mega churches are, but again, many of them have struggled with identity issues, who they are and how they do retain members rather than just have a pretty fluid base.
Thank you, Bill. This one's kind of a follow-up to that. You referenced a few times the decision of the SBC to exclude churches with women pastors. Other than just clinging to orthodoxy, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the SBC's logic in an era when their membership is already declining? What were they thinking?
Two or three things. One, and you've heard this about other groups, they have had to narrow their base. And they have a base that is extremely conservative. And because of that, that's been one of the things that's forced them to move in some of these directions, because that's where their base is. That's number one. Number two, they staked their theology on biblical inerrancy. But as several people have written these days, whenever you claim biblical inerrancy, you also wind up thinking that your theology is inerrant. Do you get that? That you're the ones, and when I listen to some of my former students from Southern Baptist Seminary, where I taught 17 years, that's the way they talk. And inerrancy, they've cultivated this view of the Bible as infallible and inerrant, but they have to follow the kind of inerrancy they have put together. And one of those is this issue, and I made a reference to it this morning. They believe, their leaders often believe that the order of creation was dictated with the creation from Genesis. And that means the father in the home and the husband in the home are the authority figures, and women are, this is the word, subject to them. And then in the church, the congregation is subject to the male pastor. And so their understanding of what they call biblical sexuality, you know, there's this group, and they've written a confession of faith called the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. They can't change on their view of women, particularly letting women into the pulpit for any reason, because that would negate their claim to inerrancy, which would give them no theological authority. Are you following? And the deeper they get with that, the more that they make these rules. There are certain schools in the country that still have Baptist affiliation, where the faculty members all the faculty, whatever they teach, has to sign the Baptist faith and message, and often the abstract of principles, which was the statement of faith of the first of the seminaries, Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville. But they've also now, for their religion faculty, added the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, the statement on biblical manhood and womanhood, and then I think it's the Denver Statement on LGBTQ issues. So I keep saying, how many things do you have to sign to be a Southern Baptist? And my point in the sermon was, once you start this, there's always going to be something else to sign, because you're never sure that you can trust the people to be orthodox. And so you have to put them to the test. And when they finally reach a point where they can't sign, you say, see, we knew you weren't orthodox to start with. So there's an arrogance under that. But they have, and they keep narrowing the base. I started to mention the sermon, didn't want to get into it. You've probably all read, because it's here, Elevation Church, which is no rabid liberal place, quit the SBC. Because they have male and female pastor teams. And what do they have? 10,000 people attending their various campuses on Sunday. And Saddleback Church, you know that with Rick Warren, they have like 50,000 people attend on a Sunday at their various locations and multiple services. So just start subtracting. But they've made their bed with dogma and inerrancy, and they can't get out of it. And they just become this case, this is me now, it's a kind of a pathetic case study. And I'll mention one other thing. They tried to pass a resolution by the convention about critical race theory, and they couldn't get it through completely. So the presidents of the 6 seminaries got together without consulting any Baptists of color and passed that their 6 schools all rejected CRT. And so a number of African American and Latino Baptists who had stayed with them have left now, including some large churches, because they didn't even have the grace to invite African Americans and Latinas to confer with them before the seminary presidents took that action. And so it deepens, and that's what they're into now. But you can expect that they'll act out next year at their meeting with a new thing to sign.
Well, thinking about that, I think the Southern Baptist Convention has caused us here at our church to consider changing our name and taking the word Baptist out of it for many, many years. And, you know, the buzz is reaching a fever pitch now that they've excluded women. So my question to you is, will you still love us if we take the word Baptist out of our name?
Well, some of you may remember 2 or 3 years ago, when the conversation really heated up, I was at a back talk session and said, no, don't give it to them. Don't give it up, because that lets them claim it. But last year, I rededicated my life here and repented of that and said, I think you all do have to consider it. And after this year, and by the way, you're not the only church that has contacted me about this. On the other hand, Carrie tells me she had a conversation with Amanda Tyler, who is the director of the Baptist Joint Committee, which I want to talk about a minute with you. And Amanda made a plaintive cry for why we shouldn't. And I think it would be worth, even if you do a Zoom with her, to hear from her about this. And that allows me to say, I put a lot of stock in that because the Baptist Joint Committee, in terms of progressive Baptist connections and causes beyond the church, is absolutely carrying the water for the rest of us, particularly about Christian nationalism. They have made that their source of identity, and they're partnering with all sorts of groups in the country, Christian and non-Christian, to make a case against Christian nationalism, which is another whole topic. And they have just incorporated with Amanda's huge insight what was the Center for Faith, Justice, and Reconciliation, which was formed out of the ashes of Baptist Theological Seminary, Richmond. And I ended up chairing the first board that was created around it. Then about a year after we started, Amanda came in. She was on the board and said, we want to take the center into the Baptist Joint Committee. And the center is chaired by a wonderful African-American woman named Dr. Sabrina Dent. And she has brought young African-American and other voices of color into the podcasts and the films that have been done to talk about this issue. And now they're inside the BJC, and they are the most representative political action group with the B word in the country. And I'm in awe of them. And I hope you'll get online and look at the things that they are doing, but they are helping the larger society understand that there are other Baptist voices, and they are helping congregations find ways to sort out this Christian nationalism, which I've called neo-establishmentarianism. As a kind of academic word, because as churches decline, particularly evangelical churches, and this has been true since Constantine, by the way, the year 313, as churches decline, and as we've talked about this before, as particularly evangelical churches lose culture privilege, they've gone to looking to the government to support them. And the ways that they are doing that are, for one thing, even when the Baptists do it, they are destructive to the tradition of religious liberty that was there in 1609 when the Baptist movement began. Because the Baptists said, everybody who has faith and wants to be a part of Christ's church needs to have some sort of experience of grace. And governments and established culture-privileged churches want to enforce a particular faith. And the early Baptists said, uncoerced faith is the only faith that has value. And they staked that out from the very first. And it was not related in 1609 to the Enlightenment or secularism. It was related to the nature of Christian faith. And now when I see my native state, Texas, wanting to have legislative approval to put ministers in place of school counselors, I see where neo-establishmentarianism is carrying the the Texas folks. And I don't think they've passed it, but it's probably going to be. And it's the Baptists and others asking the state to help them keep the doors open to enforce faith in the public schools.
Thank you. Here's one. According to the latest poll from Public Religion Research Institute 2016, those who claim religious affiliation with a religious body make no religious affiliation. Those who claim no religious affiliation with a religious body make up the largest group in the United States. They are at least 25% today and growing rapidly. The Institute changed their name from the nuns to the nons. The most startling part of this study is the reason that the vast majority of today's nons give for not affiliating with any religious body. 60% say they simply don't believe anymore. With this in mind, what are the ways the established church can reach out to persons who are not normally attracted to a church?
Yeah. I'd encourage you all to think of ways to maybe do Zoom conversations with people. I'd be happy to do one at some point with groups, small groups or study groups to talk about this, because it is happening and it's dire. And I don't mean to be a downer on this, but that's the reality. Actually, some of the studies, the nons, I call them nons because none can be N-U-N, so I don't like to get students confused about nuns and nuns. So the nons, when Gallup did this polling in the 80s and 90s, they would show up in these national sort of faith-based polls at about 7 or 8%. And by around 2000, almost every year since then, they've gone up in all the surveys. And now they're probably closer to 30% than 25%. And the phrases that are used often, you've heard, spiritual but not religious, or a believer but not a belonger. And it doesn't mean these folks necessarily don't believe in something beyond themselves or transcendence. They just don't want, they've moved back from the churches. And some of this happened a generation or two ago. I think we're 1.5 to 2 generations from when this started, in part, and this is because families quit coming with regularity to church. And to a large extent, Sunday school was the nurturing test tube for generation after generation. But, and you've heard me, I talk about this for at least the last 3 years. My deal has been the changing sociology of Sunday changed all that. And people will say to me, what do you mean by the changing sociology of Sunday? Let's have a one-word definition: soccer. And everybody like you shakes their heads because they know about the kids sitting in the back of the church and slipping out to get to the Sunday soccer games because they were required to do that. My first year here, 96, 97, I was interim pastor at Providence Baptist here, and that was when they started the early service because of what? Patriot games. So there's so many pieces of Sunday losing its privilege, and the churches waited a long time before realizing how serious that was to see what it was doing. And now, even I saw a study last week, Bob, that said a significant percentage, maybe a third of the people who on surveys claim the term to be evangelical, also say on those same surveys they only attend about once a month. That's what's happening, and secularism is a part of that. But also what's happening, and this again, I don't mean to be beating up on the Southern Baptists, but they are the case study. Churches, so many churches went public with with their doctrinal actions and beliefs, that it just turned everybody off. And then you had, with a variety of churches, but particularly the Roman Catholic Church and the Southern Baptist Convention, issues of sexual abuse. And those were two churches that wanted to tell us when, how, and who with to have sex. And they were ignoring what was going on in their midst and even protecting the people who were the abusers. And people can read the papers and they see that. And that feeds that old thing about churches are all hypocrites. Then suddenly it's not an old thing. And so there have been huge pieces of the culture that have changed, and Sunday has come to bear so many responsibilities even for church people. Aging parents, grandkids in North Carolina, houses at the beach or the mountains, jobs, work that has to be done, run the list. And so it becomes harder for churches. And that's one reason why you all, several years ago, divided up church members into small groups that didn't necessarily meet. And I've used that as an illustration, and pub theology, and we did the book on it, has been my illustration to churches all around who are saying, what can we do about it? Well, find new ways to teach and engage and participate. Churches have to go to the people. They can't wait for the people to come to us because they're just not doing it. And that whole culture issue of when you went to Bedside Baptist Church when you went to college, and then you when you got married and had a family, you decided it's time for us to go to church. It ain't happening. And so strategies, churches have to be just intense about what is the strategy we can use to reach a new generation as best we can with who we are and what the gospel's about. And that's and the longer it waits, the harder it gets because of these so many people deserting. And now the word evangelical, this is also some studies. A number of people on these exams we found out indicated that they were evangelical because they voted in a particular way, and they thought that everybody who was evangelical, they checked the E column. And there've actually been some studies that document that sort of thing too.
Thank you. Bill, I'm curious. So church attendance is declining across the board. Mm-hmm. What's happening in the seminaries? Are fewer people going to seminaries? And tell us a little bit about that. Yeah,
I have been saying this for years, or several years. The pie of seminarians gets smaller every year. And someone, an Episcopal bishop who's a former Baptist and a great friend of mine, sent me a study this week that the Episcopalians have put out. And they're looking, they had multiple seminaries since the 19th century at least all around the country, and they're either merging them, closing them down, or many of them going online. And they're a case study in the difficulties of attracting people to ministry, because as fewer people grow up in the church, fewer people know that ministry is even an option. And this is happening at undergraduates. Judson College, which was a 19th century women's college in Alabama, just closed this year. Bellarmine College, Louisville, which is Roman Catholic, has had so many students, they've moved to cultivate a business model, a business major. And that's become so strong that they're cutting people from the religion department because fewer people, you have to take a course, but one course for all the students isn't enough to keep a larger department. And that's happening all over. And so when you have people who don't grow up in church, they don't have an option that they know about to do ministry, and they don't go to church, so they don't see what some folks here would say were the joys and intensity of helping care for people through Christ Church. And so the other one thing to add, part of the way all these schools worked was the denominational networks. So you had a pastor who went to a particular college and seminary, and they encouraged the youth to go to various places. Or you had people who saw ministry in action, as we said, and then they went back to their local church as laity or clergy. And as fewer people attend, those networks are breaking apart, which is the Judson College illustration. Andover Newton, Andover Seminary was 1806 and the oldest freestanding seminary in the country. Newton, 1925, Baptist, Northern Baptist. Wonderful property in Newton, Mass. They went under about 5 years ago, and a portion of their faculty and student body merged with Yale Divinity School. So we're seeing that happen. A great friend of mine is president of Chicago Theological Seminary, which is United Church of Christ, UCC. And he started this year, and the first thing that trustees told him, you have to merge us with another school or we're not going to make it. And McCormick and Lutheran Seminary in Chicago have just merged to save themselves. We probably need to all go eat and have a drink to talk about this after church. This is down.
Carrie, how are we doing on time? I've a couple more questions. All right. Well, I've got one more just to continue the depressing topics, and then we'll maybe see if anybody in the congregation does. So, this last week we read that we've had the hottest 2 days, worldwide in recorded history. 4 days, I'm being told. Hottest 4 days in recorded history, and probably any time in the last 125,000 years, we're told, which is almost as long as humans have been around. This is really scary news. And my question is, how do we stay hopeful with that kind of bad news that's really existential? And I know that's a sermon topic, but if you got a short answer or maybe can point us to some scripture, that would help.
Well, I've been writing about this for some time. My friend Roger Gottlieb, who teaches at Worcester Polytech in Massachusetts, Jewish scholar, philosophy, is one of the foremost religion-related environmental writers, Gottlieb, Leib. And he and I have been friends for 30 years. We both have daughters who are special needs, and we met that way. And he's been the person who has just pushed me in these directions. And one of the things I've put in some sermons, and I almost wanted to do it today, I didn't have a place. I keep wondering, in the Noah story, when did the people know that the flood was so real that it was too late? And that's where we are. They were eating and drinking and giving in marriage, Jesus' word, and it happened. And we've been talking about it could be worse if we don't hurry. Now it's not going to change, and we have to hurry to keep it from changing till we can't live here. And legislatively, I don't see a way out, because we keep electing people who won't take it seriously. North Carolina is a case in point. Passing legislation, saw this week, big thing in our local paper about the governor vetoed a new legislation related to building that will slow down new building of ecologically appropriate housing and large buildings. That's now, that's this week. And it'll be overridden. So if people keep voting for people who are doing this, then we're like the people in Noah's day. And it's really, really this whole, and we've all seen the storms that come through, particularly the Tornado Alley, but they've hit here already, and they're going to get worse, and hurricanes and the oceans, and all, you all know that. I think churches have to rise to this occasion as best we can, and do. I think it's really at a serious place. And yes, go ahead. Take him a mic.
The people online won't hear you unless you speak into that.
Okay. I have a Catholic background, and I'm so curious to know, you mentioned Richard Rohr. How Richard Rohr manages, within the context of Orthodoxy, how does he manage not to get his wrists slapped if something...
Yeah, they've been slapped, but he's so popular, and the Roman Catholics need people who are popular right now, and he's able to do that. And he also, one of the things in the church, Catholic Church and other churches too, you can kind of create a zone. Thomas Merton had that kind of zone, and now he has a pope who will protect pretty much. But he's, and I get every day his daily devotional. Some of you do too. And I don't always get to read it, but I happen to read the one I quoted from today, and I'm going back to it because I'd forgotten how wonderful he is. But I think part of it is he has a zone in the church where he's permitted. And there's a coalition, like he referenced Greg Boyle, who has a new book out, the street priest in Los Angeles, and they've been able to find a zone with bishops who protect them or give them some semblance. But it's a struggle. And you remind me to say one more thing. We've known this for a long time, but even the great popular monasteries, Mepkin Abbey down in South Carolina, is down to a handful of monks. Gethsemane in Kentucky, which shaped me in terms of spirituality, similarly. And St. Meinrad, which is the Benedictine Abbey just across the line from Kentucky and Indiana, I took students there every year in the church history class, and they're at a handful. So that loss of that whole monastic identity is vanishing in our lifetime. And so that's part of what the church is struggling with right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You promised in the sermon that you would tell us about the Coors Light link.
That's a great way to end. I love
don't remember the context.
Yes. You know, I don't know if you've seen this in the papers, but Coors Light made a particular affirmative response to LGBTQ issues. And now they have become, in terms of advertisement, and I think it wasn't much, but it was an affirmation, maybe in preparation for Pride Week or something. But now there was an article again, I think in the Times or the Post, I can't remember which one, that beer distributors have all this leftover Coors Light because it's become a cause célèbre for conservative folks who think that LGBTQ issues are not appropriate in the public or anywhere. And so they've boycotted Coors Light. And the last I read, the Coors company has not backed down from their relatively small. And by the way, they've also put a bit of a thing on Chick-fil-A, because Chick-fil-A, which had been so strong in all this before, got a diversity officer in their company. And that has been, so my spouse and I have started going back to Chick-fil-A in appreciation for that. And she likes the ice cream cones. But that's what's happened with Coors Light. And it's an overstock because they can't sell any. People go into bars and say, no, that's the last thing I want. So I was cheap and tawdry today in putting that in the sermon, but I was just going to test you, so thanks. Thank you all for letting me come.
Yeah.
These are great questions that you've asked, and I just encourage you, and you've been doing this, to be very intentional as a congregation about who you are and what you want to be, and what these trends mean, and how you can respond to them. And every church is having to do that. It's not just you all. But thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Bill.